Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here and talk about this because this is a very big problem. And you don't need me to tell pet parents what it looks like when their dog or their cat is freaked out by a storm. But we're going to talk about more of the symptoms and why they occur and a lot of the things that we can do to help. And nowadays, there's a great deal. In fact, we're going to talk about a little bit of new research and an excellent new non-medication treatment for this problem. And so we're going to try to see if we can improve everybody's quality of life, including the people who love these dogs, who find this problem really quite distressing. So you can see from the top of this slide that this is a very common problem, and it can progress to a true phobia. And the difference between a dog who is startled by loud noises and trembles and just hides out, and one who has really severe symptoms is the distinction we put the term phobia, which means that their reaction is way out of proportion to the actual threat. And let's face it, any of us could get struck by lightning, and we'd come away from that experience if we survived it with a real serious phobia. But most of our dogs haven't been hit by lightning. This is not a fear that is based on anything logical, and hence it's a true phobia because there really isn't a legitimate threat in any likelihood at all. And in fact, if your dog has this problem, you're not alone. As many as half of dogs do this, but it isn't an all or nothing thing. We don't say that a pet is noise reactive or storm or noise phobic, one or the other. There's a lot of shades of gray in here. And what concerns us from a clinical standpoint in helping these dogs is that we know from modern brain imaging, like fMRIs and PET scans, that these behaviors, they get rehearsed. The dog recognizes the stimulus. Maybe it's the ionic changes in the air as a storm approaches, or it's the humidity changes, or the clouds darkening the sky. Well, they've been down this path before, and they recognize these indicators, and they begin to ramp up their anxiety. And then, of course, when the thunder and lightning occurs, boy, they're just at the top of the worst of the problem. Well, each time they ramp up through this series of neural sequences in their brains, starting with a long-term memory storage in the hippocampus and inputs from multiple different neural centers in the brain. And again, with modern brain imaging, we see a lot more of these things. They've been able to measure the thickness of these circuits in the brain, and they've come to learn that they get bigger and the synapses get stronger, and they're more inhibitory and excitatory neural inputs that sharpen and speed the response. You've heard the old expression, practice makes perfect. Well, the reason is that you just go one time after the next, repeating these ramp ups in fear and phobias. And so a dog who may start out with mild reaction, with enough repetition, they can get a lot worse. And so early recognition and treatment, like we hear about problems in any organ system, makes all the difference. So we're going to get after this ASAP. But even if your dog has had this problem for a while, it's never too late to start. Again, especially because we have some wonderful new treatments, and they really can feel much better. So here's Coda, golden retriever, and this is the thunderstorm outside. I mean, this poor dog is trembling. You can hear him smacking his lips and licking, real indicators of anxiety. If you notice this little outfit, this friend of mine was unaware that there are these compression vests that you can get nowadays. And he had two daughters. And of course, one of them outgrew the one-piece bathing suit. So he modified it and put it on the dog. And that did help. Didn't solve his problem, but it made a difference. And this graphic is just intended to show that what we call comorbidities, in other words, problems that exist together. This slide had to do with largely separation anxiety, but you can see that noise phobias and separation anxiety typically, or very commonly, I should say, they coexist. And so if your dog has fear of storms, it might be smart for you to get an inexpensive surveillance camera. You can get Nest Cam for 99 bucks online. They send you 2 cameras, and you can get an app to download onto your smartphone. And even if you don't come home to find damage or house soiling, or your neighbors aren't complaining about a lot of barking and crying, your dog may be pacing and agitated in your absence, might have a mild to moderate degree of separation anxiety. You need to know that, because that too will worsen over time. And as people go back to the office when we finally get beyond this darn epidemic and get vaccinated and things go better, we have to be optimists here. Some dogs who were marginally alive and functional with this thing when their folks were at work before, and then got accustomed to their people being back home, wait, then you go back to work again, and your dog, we're going to see a lot of these dogs start to freak out and destabilize. And so if your dog has noise phobias, whether it's storms or fireworks, gunshots, that kind of stuff, a surveillance video of your dog while you're gone, and if your dog is behaving in ways that are different than when you're home together, then you may have a problem with separation distress or separation anxiety. And one of the treatments we'll talk about in a few minutes is really good for that and other associated anxieties like storm phobia. So, where do you start with this thing? Well, avoidance is really important, and many people have this figured out themselves. No surprise, pet parents who really love their dogs tend to start doing some thinking and figure this stuff out in advance. Here's a product called Mutt Muffs. You can see it on this sheltie here. I have seen very few dogs have any complaints or resistance. This thing, what you cannot see is that the strap going under this dog's chin, and they're adjustable. They come in different sizes, and they look a lot like ear muffs that a person would wear in the cold weather. But they do a really good job of reducing the noise input. And so many dogs, when they've used these before, and here comes the storm, and their person is ready to put the Mutt Muffs on their dog, the dog sees the owner handling the Mutt Muffs, and they go right to their person, and they're immediately showing signs of greater relaxation because they already anticipate they're going to feel better when there's less of this racket coming in. So here's an act of kindness, and it will help. In just about all cases. Lightning flashes are another big issue, and so we like interior rooms that have no exterior walls. A big walk-in closet, frankly, it doesn't even have to be that big. If you leave the door open, most dogs will actually figure out where they will feel the safest. And so many of them will seek out a closet. If you leave the door open a little bit, not all the way necessarily, because they want to feel snug in there. They want to feel protected. So they'll get underneath the clothes that are hanging in there. And there's a lot of fabric, obviously, in a closet. So that helps to diminish the sound. And when they're away from windows, they're just not going to see the lightning flashes. And that's a very big part of the constellation of stimuli that trigger this ramp up in fear and panic. So draw the window blinds. And, blackout blinds even better. And if you don't have blackout blinds and you can hang a blanket over the curtain rod at those times, even better. There's a little thing called a thunder cap. You can see that on the golden retriever in the bottom of the picture. And these things, another little device that very few dogs have any argument with. And the trick to these, by the way, is rather than going to a scared dog and approaching and leaning over and putting this foreign-looking thing on their head, which some of them are pretty nervous about, especially if they're already getting kind of wiggy, is you hold a treat in your hand between your tips of your fingers, and you hold that where the opening is in the front of this thunder cap, and you hold it up so that the dog approaches the thunder cap to get the food. And gradually you can teach your dog that you're going to be putting this over her face, and then ultimately you're going to be using these little Velcro straps to hold it in place. They're very comfortable. But you want to practice this with your dog when there is no loud noise, so that the dog learns that, you know what, it's quite comfortable and I can get food. And so once your dog is wearing the thunder cap, you can give her an occasional little biscuit. The same is true with the Mutt Muffs. You can hold out a treat and your dog comes, and you can gradually teach your dog that, wait, when you come near this funny looking thing we're going to put on your head, you get treats, You get a very kind, soft tone. I discourage people from being really high enthusiasm when they're reinforcing their dog for being calm, or putting their face into a thunder cap, or you know, putting their head so you can put the muffs on. You want her to associate a calm emotional state with everything related to storms or fireworks or any of that stuff. It's all very low key. You're the leader, and as such, your dog looks to you to set the emotional tone. And so your job is to say, hey, we're good, no big deal. Here, let's put this on, we'll all feel better. Noise, boy, that's a big factor too. Nowadays we have these tower type fans that hardly make any noise at all. They're nice. But if you still have one of those old fashioned ones that came in the big, square shaped frame, and they were kind of noisy, they sounded like an old propeller driven airplane, those are pretty darn good at masking noise. There is an excellent product that you can order online called Through a Dog's Ear, and they make one for cats called Through a Cat's Ear. And this is music that is scientifically developed to be in synchrony with the alpha waves in the dog's brain or the cat's brain. They're different. And it promotes the formation of more of those calming alpha waves. If you look at any of these things and you say, well, why don't I just pick the one that's most valuable? You're going to get a much better result if we integrate lots of different things that will help your dog feel better. Some of them might be more impactful than others, but you want to make all the difference you can. You want your dog to feel as calm as possible. And again, we want to slow down the advancement of this problem. In fact, we want to put the kibosh on the advancement so that going forward, your dog abandons those old neural circuits in the brain and says, hey, you know what? When I start hearing a storm approach, or I pick up that scent of that rising humidity in the air, boy, I can anticipate these good things. And they can have a significant attitude shift in this thing because of your leadership. So white noise can do it. Classical music can be very helpful. All of these things can be good. Low key classical music, not the Beethoven stuff. Okay. Crating, many people want to put their dog in a crate. Dogs are denning creatures. They don't live in a den, but they can feel a lot more secure in there. If you have a wire crate, you want to cover it with a towel so that it feels like a den. But you never want to close the door, because dogs need choices. We study them in the wild, and we realize that they can choose to go to their den and they can choose to exit it. And when we close or latch the door to the crate, dog's out of choices and they're trapped. And if they're starting to get kind of agitated and they need to manifest that by pacing, for goodness sake, let them pace. And so, comforting your dog, it's actually an okay thing too. But we don't want to have the dog feel like they're restrained and they can't escape. And a few dogs who have a normally relaxed, happy, very gentle personality with their family, when they're in a state of panic and somebody's holding onto them tight, hoping that that'll help them feel better, and the dog cannot escape and begins to struggle, some of them become fearful and fear aggressive, and they would never otherwise do that. So, give your dog choices, and if they want to walk around, they should do that. They want to go to the closet, they should do that. Some dogs, interestingly, camp out behind a toilet because the plumbing that supplies water to the toilet, that attracts the ionic charges in the air, and so there's less of that behind the toilet. And usually bathrooms don't have exterior windows, and so that feels a little better. If that's where your dog chooses to be, then put a nice comfy pad in there and make that your dog's special hideout. Whatever they want, really. So, why is this thing going on? Well, we know that heredity is a big part of it in many dogs. The genome has been worked out in many of these, and we've come to learn that not all of them, but many herding breeds they're overrepresented. I have a border collie, and she has a problem. And so we're doing most of these things. I'll tell you about more of what we do for her here in a minute. But yeah, in fact, the structure, the neural circuitry in two breeds that are very commonly affected, the standard poodle and the soft-coated Wheaten Terrier, those we actually have very specific knowledge of what is different in their brains than other dogs. So never believe that your dog is trying to manipulate or trying to, require you or demand attention on these things. There are dogs who are attention seeking. That's a different problem. But, if they have storm phobia, this is a neurologic problem. It's a physical problem in this organ right up here. And it needs to have physical medicine in addition to behavior modifications. We'll talk about that. So, you're empathic, or you wouldn't bother watching this webinar. And so I'm glad about that. We used to say, and this is true with many behaviors, is that dogs regard any response at all from their leader as a validation of their behavior or their emotional state at the moment. And that is true of anxiety states, that smoldering worry about what might be lurking around the next corner. But fear is not the same as anxiety. And so a fear state is one that is not something that is worsened by attention from the pet parent. In fact, we have new research just published in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior last month that when people sit with their pet and talk to their pet, again, they don't restrain them, but they touch them and pet them if that's what makes the pet comfortable. Well, these pets actually get better. So do that. And if you've got somebody in your family who somehow feels like it's a good idea to scold or reprimand, or some people actually ridicule dogs or cats when they're behaving this way, there's no point in scolding somebody like that. It's understandable that you might feel like it, but you don't change another person, do you? Instead, you want to take your dog someplace where that person is not, because those kinds of things actually worsen the fear. That raises the tension, and that's just one more element that's ratcheting up your poor dog's fear. So nobody who's going to get agitated around an agitated dog, they need to be kept separated. Okay, so we can preempt this stuff. We can work ahead of it. The thing with thunderstorms is they're pretty inconsistent. We know in most parts of the country, goodness, the people in Florida and the Gulf Coast right now are really getting badly hammered, and there's a lot of nervous dogs there. And if we can teach your dog prior to storm season that things are going to be different every time after this, we can make a difference. And so one of the things I like to do is to say, look, when do we expect this stuff to occur? Storm phobia is somewhat different than fireworks phobia, but we know when fireworks are going to happen. We know when 4th of July is, and we know that in many areas, New Year's Eve is a big problem. And so we're going to work ahead of those, and we're going to try to work ahead of storm season as well. So also think about coexisting anxieties like separation anxiety, because that is consistent, isn't it? I mean, those dogs are going to have a problem every time they're left alone. And again, let's find out if your dog has that. If you don't want to invest in a home surveillance camera, you can just take your smartphone, prop it up against a couple of books, or use an inexpensive little iPhone tripod, and aim it, in most cases, at the interior side of your exit door, because that's where most dogs with separation anxiety spend part of their time, if not all of it. And just drive away for 10 or 20 minutes and you'll get a sense of whether you have that problem. So let's find that one out. But something that we can do for the long term, this isn't something you do at the time of storms, but you can use this is a new product approved for dogs, although it's been around for a while and it's undergone a lot of research to the point where the frequency of this thing is very well fitted for dogs. It's called a Comor canine. And the Comor canine puts out a pulse electromagnetic field targeting the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, right at the back of the head. And so this dog in this picture, I'll show you another picture, but he's wearing a little vest, a very comfy thing, goes around the neck and around the chest and held together by Velcro. And right behind the dog's head is a Velcro patch. And you stick this little halo-shaped thing, very lightweight, to that. And you give the dog 2 15-minute treatments every day. And the dog doesn't have to remain immobile. There's no sensation. It's completely safe. And about 80% of dogs who are treated with this have substantial improvements. Usually takes a 4 to 6 week treatment course. Here's a story of this little dog named Sufi. And I'm sure you can read as well as I can. They live in South Florida, lots of storms. And this poor dog has a history of jumping onto its owner's lap and just wigging out. And she knew that she had to do something different because, yeah, of course, the problem was worsening. And she found that just a few treatments of the calmer canine, this dog already was feeling better. Now, we don't know that it was making changes to the insides of the nerve cells, what are called the microglia, is really what it works on. And it changes, it adjusts the neurochemistry in there. And we've got all the details, and you can find more of it on the Calmer Canine website. That's CALMER, the letter K, the number 9.com, calmercanine.com. You can learn a lot more about mechanically how this thing works. But this little dog, Sufi, was clearly starting to feel better because she understood the routine. And she was already better. And let me just show you a brief video. I mean, here she is, just to give you a sense of what a cute, playful dog this is when there's not a storm going on. I mean, you love dogs like this, don't you? And here she is wearing her calmer canine. And again, she doesn't have to sit perfectly still. And you can see that little vest that she's wearing around her chest, and she's taking treats. People sit with their dogs in the morning while they're having breakfast, or in the evening when they're answering email or watching TV. And the thing turns itself off after 15 minutes. So real simple and easy to use. So there's lots of other stuff we can do during a storm, okay? Kindness means setting a dog up for success. So many of these dogs associate a special bed in their special little hideout that's comfortable, and they associate that being in that comfy bed with feeling better. So having a particular bed is a great idea. Food dispensing toys and puzzles. This is a picture of one called a twist and treat. It's one of scores of these that are available, and they're coming up with new ones all the time. And they're wonderful because they hearken to the natural foraging and scavenging behaviors that dogs engage in the wild every day to survive. So if your dog has not been fed in a little while and is somewhat hungry, and here comes a storm, and you can put some really tasty food in a somewhat challenging food dispensing toy or a puzzle, then the dog can focus their brain on extracting that food to the exclusion of, well, those muted sounds, and they don't see the flashes, and you've done a good job. And this dog now can say, wow, I get an opportunity to survive by foraging, and gee, I kind of forgot all about the storm. So these things can be really valuable. You want to teach your dog to work with these prior to. Preparation matters. If your dog has some decent obedience skills, you can use those and focus the dog on looking to you, his leader, and earning resources like food and petting and attention. Dogs don't believe they're entitled to that, They believe that it has to be earned. So they're focusing on earning these things that are so important to them instead of wigging out by themselves. T-Touch, you can look this up on the internet. Tellington Touch, developed by a lady named Linda Tellington, actually developed it in horses. It's been effective in just about any species with fur. And you can use moves similar to this one called the abalone. There's a bunch of others. And they actually have a neurologic calming effect on a dog. You can do it as soon as the dog starts acting nervous. But if you want to, you can ask your dog to do a simple command and then use this as reinforcement. So the dog looks forward to getting a command and then feeling immediately better. So that's a great sequence to get your dog focused on you and kind of abandoning all that other racket. There are behavior modifications, but you've got to start them ahead. You don't do it during a storm. So the best one is called counter conditioning. It's very simple. And really all you have to do is, you can do it during a storm, is that when the dog starts to get nervous, you can give it food. And the dog says, oh, thunderclap, food, thunderclap, food. And the dog starts to associate a different emotional outcome. People just do this even without being taught some complex technique. And 70% of dog parents with storm phobic dogs have found this to be helpful. Okay, relaxation exercises like the Tellington Touch, similar effectiveness. There's a CD, this is one of many, it's called Sounds Scary. There are others, and they have thunderstorm noises, they have firework noises, gunshot noises, and these dogs can learn, when it's not storm season, if you play these in another room, that when they hear that sound, then they can earn things from their leader. They can get the T-touch relaxation exercise. They can get the counter conditioning, like getting food right after hearing it. And these things can help the dog change its association with those triggers to something a lot more pleasant. These pressure vests like thunder shirts, not as big a difference, but some people and some dogs have found them helpful. And prescription medication. And, people think, oh, well, that's what I need. We'll make this problem go away with a pill. It helps, okay? These things are quite reliable. We understand how they work, but I always urge people to bring into the mix to help their dog as much as possible all of the other things we've discussed. And, individual dogs, some of them might be more valuable than in a different dog, so you custom fit it as you go. The benzodiazepines are things like Valium and Xanax. They don't do much if the dog's already anxious. They're much better used preemptively. The problem is, as you can see, most of them aren't very long acting. Clorazepate is longer, but again, you have to give them preemptively in most cases. And some of them, a minority, will actually get more anxious. So they're often not my first choice. Trazodone is another very reliable, good for about 6 or 8 hours. But typically you got to give it a couple hours before the storm. Clonidine is another anti-anxiety that can be helpful. Similar situation. Cilio is one of the best things to come along in a little while. It is a gel, comes in a syringe, no needle, and you put a little dab of this gel between the lower lip and the gum, and in 20 minutes it becomes effective. And this is the one that will work even during the storm. It lasts for about 2 hours, and you can repeat it. It's a very good treatment. There are pheromones like Adaptil. You can use a plug-in diffuser or an Adaptil collar. They're helpful, but people say, oh, tried that, didn't work. Well, they'd hope that it would take care of the whole problem all by itself. Won't do that, but as a part of the whole mix can make a significant difference. In cats, we can use these medications. None of them are approved in cats, but we've got lots of outside research and experience with them, and we understand how they work in cats. And these can be very helpful too.